Well, welcome to the 2023 Big Questions Forum. I'm Sarah Blackstock, the coordinator of the Big Questions. And the big question this year is humankind good or selfish? Thank you to the Interfaith Council of Rossmore and to Susie Cole, who has nourished the big questions for many years. I think this is our 7th year or 8th year. I've kind of lost track. And thank you to the Big Questions Committee, Sunshine, La Gloria Sunshine, Ruth Ahern, and Channing Miller. And Will, we so much appreciate you. Will is the executive director of the Contra Costa County Interfaith Council, and you generously hosted us for all of these years on our Zoom. Thanks also to Rossmore Channel 28, who is recording this session and has been for many years. And also, I'd like to say a gratitude to the folks at Rossmore News. They have been publishing the articles about the big questions that I've sent them for a number of years. So thank you, Rossmore News, if you'll hear this. It does take a village to do this kind of work. And those of you who are here and more will be coming, you are the inquiring minds of Rossmore. You know, some people are out there square dancing, which is just fine, or hiking the trails, which is just fine. And yet here you are, you know, with the big questions, and hopefully I look forward to your participation when it's time for y'all to join in the conversation. I just want to welcome Kitty Barnes. Haven't seen you for a while, Kitty, and it's really good to see you. Welcome. So as we have mentioned before, even though there is one big question, is humankind good or selfish? It invites other questions to be pulled out of that one big question. The exploration of this question takes us through many disciplines as we search for answers. We can look through the disciplines of anthropology, history, archaeology, psychology, philosophy, and of course, religious traditions. And probably it could be found in many more ways of searching for answers. We can look at the macro or the micro of this question. The macro would deal with generalizations, with humankind as a whole. And if we look at the micro, we can examine ourselves as a microcosm, asking as we live each day, are we being altruistic or self-centered? Do we take our friends, our neighbors, our community, country, and planet into consideration as we shop, drive, take care of our homes, our children, our friends, our relatives, and eat our meals? Let's glean insights from what our speakers have to say. The first speaker is Reverend Rodney Lemery. Reverend Lemery currently serves as the Justice and Engagement Minister for the Mount Diablo Unitarian Universalist Church of Walnut Creek. He comes to that position from the Worthy Now Prison Network at the Church of the Larger Fellowship, as well as a volunteer chaplain at the Solano County Jail. He lives in Hercules, California, with his husband, a human resources professional, and their fur baby, Basil. I would love to see Basil sitting on your lap, Rodney. Rodney and his husband are members of the Mount Diablo Unitarian Universalist Church in Walnut Creek, where Rodney also holds a part-time assistant ministry as the justice minister for the congregation. Rodney's theological foundation is rooted in process and relational thought and can be summarized in the following terms: the great mystery of life, the divine, or what some call God, is that aspect of the metaphysical that permeates all of the nooks and crannies of the universe, creating a fabric of interconnections among all things. This deep connection calls us all to care, love, teach, and learn from one another. Through this profound relationship, all of the interactions between all of us, we have the capacity to recognize a more whole, just, and perfect world. Welcome, Reverend Lemery.
Thank you. Thank you all again. I was supposed to be with you last month and I had miscalculated my calendar and double booked myself. So I'm very grateful for this opportunity to speak with you and hopefully make up for missing all of you last month. But I wanted to start recognizing that maybe some of you know about Unitarian Universalism and maybe some of you don't. And I know that if you're like me, history may not necessarily spark any kind of happiness in your heart. But I'm going to try and change that today and give us a really quick, very concise history of Unitarian Universalism because it is going to be the theological core that I meet with you today on. And I think we can all benefit from being on the same page. So let me share my screen. And hopefully at this point, you see a timeline in front of you. And I just wanted to run through and show you that, in fact, both Unitarianism and Universalism, at least in the Americas, has a very long and rich history, beginning in ancient Christianity. So, in ancient Christianity, we can see that both Unitarianism and Universalism have origins there. In ancient Christianity, the theologian Origen is kind of given the notation of starting this kind of universal thought within the Catholic Church, the Catholic faith back then. And Arius is the Unitarian equivalent who got into quite a bit of trouble for suggesting that, in fact, God was one. So ancient Christianity is, in fact, the origins, and throughout time, Unitarianism has become part of the European fabric of religion, both in Transylvania, Poland, and in the UK as well. Interesting fact, Transylvania had the only Unitarian king in the 1500s. So that's kind of a little badge of honor in our history line. It wasn't until the 18th century that those from the English Unitarian Church, which are in fact part at that time were part of the Congregational Church of Puritans and people who left England to reform and to colonize the states. They came, and the Unitarians of America began to further segregate themselves from the Congregational Church in terms of theology and background. The Universalism in America began around that same time, springing up in the rural areas of the country, bringing a modified version, some would say heretical version of Christianity that included the fact that God, or the thought that God was so loving that it would never damn anyone to hell. Over time, in the 18th century, the Unitarian and Universalist Christian churches started to really release their hold on the traditional interpretation of the Christ story, namely the requirement to believe in what Christians call the substitutional atonement, or the ability for Christ to give of his life to forgive all sins of humanity. By the mid to late 18th century, both the Unitarians and Universalists of America had grown away from that belief. And in fact, as we start to get more into present day, The youth groups from those two Christian denominations merged in 1953. And then finally in 1961, the Unitarian and Universalist American traditions merged into a new faith called Unitarian Universalism, with a broader understanding of who we are and what we believe. If there are any Unitarian Universalist historians online, I apologize profusely for that very rough, dirty, and quick history of our faith. I am sure better minds than mine can give you more specifics if you would like. Um, so, why'd I tell you this? Well, this is the kind of root that I'm coming from. I'm coming from a Christian and therefore also Jewish influenced theology. And while we to this day, most of us do not profess to be Christians in the Unitarian Universalist faith, we are very much informed from those cultural origins. But I read the question, the big question, and I thought, huh, my initial thinking was, I wonder why they shied away from the word evil, because normally I would see this big question posed as, are humans good or evil? And at first it took me aback. I didn't know what to do with that information. How am I going to address this? How am I going to modify my concept of this question that I, if anything, had been prepared for in seminary, this struggle of, are we inherently good or are we inherently evil? And then I came across a beautiful quote from the Union Theological School theologian Reinhold Niebuhr. And many of you may know Reinhold Niebuhr for what
There
he
it
is
is.
more famous for, which is the Serenity Prayer. Very much used in most of the 12-step programs in the world. But this was a quote that I found from him that was not something I was familiar with. And I'd like to share that quote with you because I think it reframes exactly what you were trying to get at. And the quote is, evil is always the assertion of some interest without regard to the whole, whether the whole be conceived as the immediate community or the total community of humanity or the total order of the world. Good is, on the other hand, always the harmony of the whole on various levels. This I thought this helped me frame the concept of selfless versus selfish behavior or belief. Or in my case, because as we said in the introduction, I believe deeply in a relational theology, our impact on one another. So most of my ministerial work, I'm a relatively new minister. I've only been at this for 4 or 5 years out of seminary, but all of that time has been spent. Um, Probably some would declare it on, and we can talk about why I would not call it on the fringes, but some people may say on the fringes in populations of people that, in truth, society has turned their back on and deemed selfish or, in some circles, evil. And that is in the prison ministry and jail ministry that has influenced a lot of my now parish or congregational ministry. And I take Niebuhr's quote and I look at my own faith tradition. And in our faith, we have a set of principles that bind us all together. And that's, we do not believe in a dogma. We gave the dogma up at the merger in 1961. We no longer believe in an actual professed statement of faith, but instead rather have 7 principles that bind all of our congregations to one another in an association. And for that, I'm going to show you just briefly the principles themselves. So in this, and I'll, as soon as I can move my bar, I'll make this bigger. The 2 principles that I'm going to talk about today, which I think are directly related, especially to the Niebuhr quote, are the first and the 7th principle. The first principle being that we profess that every person has inherent worth and dignity. And the seventh principle is a deep respect and understanding for the interdependent web of all existence. So we have a deep and profound belief both in the inherent worth and dignity of the individual and in this larger frame of community connection that really does bind us all to one another. And so when I am thinking about this question, I am thinking about how does this affect the theological underpinnings of my faith? And it's hard for me, it was hard for me to try and explain to you how these seemingly opposite pillars actually could potentially be in harmony. And that is when I located yet another quote from a Russian novelist and prominent Soviet dissident, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who was imprisoned in one of Stalin's gulags. He famously said that the line between good and evil lies in the center of the human heart, not in some abstract moral celestial space, but right here in each of our own collective beings. And that really helped me kind of take your question and frame it into Unitarian Universalism, which believes that very thing. We must find a way to balance the inherent worth and dignity of all people, something that is seemingly a selfish, individualistic principle, with that of the deep interconnectedness of all things, this communal principle that seems to move us beyond the individual. And so, how do we do that? We come back to the center to try and find some balance. And because of the need for balance, I wanted to share with you two anecdotes from our lives and from my personal experience that really demonstrate, to me at least, the very, very negative things that can happen if we are out of alignment, out of balance between the individual selfish nature and the more selfless communal principle of Unitarianism. So the first I'm going to use is our criminal justice system, which I will call it that, even though I typically don't believe that it provides much justice, and that's my own opinion. But in here in the United States, our justice system is set up as a punitive system, and it has origins within the history, like everything in our country, of our origins of being an enslaved people. At least those of us who are white were enslavers or had ancestors who were enslavers. And the origins of our enforcement of laws became property, namely the property of the enslaved people who found their way from enslavement properties into the northern region. And so militias of men at that time would be allowed to enter into those states and bring back, quote, the property where it was removed. And that kind of set us up for this lens of punitive justice, focusing on the thing the person did specifically in relationship to some kind of loss of property. And now we can see that now true with broken windows, you call the cops, theft, you call the cops. All of these things have property kind of aspects to their emphasis. And when you look at what crimes actually are solved compared to what aren't, a lot of them are property driven crimes that get addressed, whereas other crimes remain unaddressed in our current justice system. So this kind of construct of communal care, being we care about our property, we need laws that protect our property, that protect our things, this swings us into an area that is really, really damaging, because we are in our punitive system. Individuals are not given comfort, care. They are not told how they have both, let's say, inherent worth and dignity and potential or proclivity for bad things. We all have that, as the quote from Stojanitska says. But in our criminal justice system, we emphasize so much on the the punitive side of things, and this is because we are trying to protect our property, the community, keep people out of community situations where they can violate laws. Anyway, so I think this is underscored further through the writings of like Otis Moss III, a United Church of Christ minister in Chicago, who tells a story of the Bembe tribe of South Africa. And in this tribe, unlike a punitive system, this tribe believes in a communal restorative justice type care. And so what happens is when a person offends the tribe through self-ish behavior that damages the tribal community, they are brought before the tribe, and the tribe is summoned and encircles the person. And whether it takes hours, days, weeks, or months, the tribe simply, one by one, turns to that person and reminds them of all the good that they have ever done for the community. The transgression is not discussed. Rather, the person is uplifted and reminded of all the things they have contributed to their society, their community. And that repeats and repeats and repeats until the person atones for what they have done. And so, in that way, and then at that point, the entire community erupts in jubilation, welcoming back one of their own into their greater society. So, this type of restorative practice, this restorative justice model, shows that we can still balance between the individual and the communal powers that drive the human experience, at least as far as I can see. And obviously, I should have said this at the beginning, I don't speak for all Unitarian Universalists. I speak for myself and my own background and experiences. And then the opposite side of where we might see a promotion of the individual uh, principles up to a level that is imbalanced, shall we say. I think we can look no further than the politicization of vaccines and mask mandating here in the United States. In fact, you can see that pre 1910, which was the year that antibiotics were made readily available, the epidemiologic data shows that the top deaths in the US during that time were tuberculosis, heart disease, followed by all pneumococcal infections. So that is what we call the infectious disease period of the US history. And shortly after that, over a series of years, the US began to do what's called an epidemiologic transition. And so all of a sudden now our mortality became less and less infectious disease ridden and more what we call chronic diseases. So up until 2020, if you were to have looked back then at the top causes of death, you would have seen heart disease, uh, injuries of all sorts of origin, and cancer. Post 2020, however, we now see that it is heart disease, cancer, and COVID 19. So, because I believe because we have valued in many parts of our country the individual belief that they can do what they want without regard to the public health, we have now seen our country transition back into a epidemiologic transition where infectious disease now is a top killer amongst our people. And so, again, underscoring an opposite imbalance where we have taken the individual rights and made them more important, outweighing the communal needs of society. So I know this doesn't answer your question. Are we inherently good or selfish? But it's kind of my UU take and a couple of examples of what drives me in believing that actually I think that we have the capacity for both. We are completely capable of swinging between uplifting and empowering love for one another and care. And then we also can swing to the exact opposite of caring nothing about anyone else and focusing just on our human basic needs. And with that, I'll be quiet.
Thank you, Rodney. I found it very interesting that you focused on why we didn't use, you asked the question, why we didn't use evil. And, there's a couple of other members of the Big Questions Committee here also. So Ruth and Sunshine, please speak up. But my understanding of why we chose selfish instead of evil is because evil is such a loaded word. It brings in, the Satan and the devil and, all of these kinds of images. Actually, selfishness is, in a sense, evil. Because if we look at evil not so much as sin, but evil as an error or a mistake, much of selfishness is mistaken. We put it where it doesn't belong. So thank you for bringing that up. Also, I wanted to ask you, what is the name of the tribe, the communal restorative justice tribe? What's the name of that tribe? That's fascinating.
I'll put the correct spelling in the chat, and I'm also going to give you a copy of the notes and the references as well. But it's the Bembembe tribe.
Bembembe.
Yeah, and they're in South Africa. So let me.
Bembembe. Yeah. Okay. In the chat.
Bembemba. Sorry, Bembemba.
Okay.
There you go.
Can you imagine? Us doing that in a small scale, in a neighborhood? Say like there's somebody in a neighborhood who has been really selfish. The people in the neighborhood would gather around that person and tell them all of the good things that they have done. How uplifting that would be to emphasize the good instead of what bad thing they've done. That's great. Ruth, please go ahead.
So I'm curious to know, I could put my face back on, sorry. I'm curious to know how this idea of goodness and selfishness, how does that play out in our individual lives? What can we do to promote goodness and overcome selfishness? How can we act according to this rule?
Am I supposed to respond?
Oh, please go ahead and respond, Rodney. That's just fine.
Okay.
That's what I'm curious about. Thank you.
Right.
Yeah.
They want to hear you.
Here.
That's super, obviously super hard, and I don't have the answers to that, but I can tell you what, as Unitarian Universalists, we try to do. So earlier, I told you the history. I told you that for the most part, we've rejected the dogma of Christianity, and that may feel like we kind of exist in the wind somewhere without anything that kind of ties us all together. And frankly, we're still struggling with that. 1961, theologically, did a number on us, and so we're still kind of recovering from that. And there's a lot happening in our own denomination right now to rectify that. But we have always, since that time forward, been a covenantal faith, which means all of our faith communities have individual covenants within them that bind those people to one another. So if you came to Walnut Creek's Unitarian Church, Mount Diablo, we have a covenant in place. And if you join or you participate as what we call a friend, we expect you to follow the covenant, and the covenant binds us through behavior. So when that covenant is broken, we have a process that we use that calls people back into accountability and to relationship with one another. And while imperfect, it is a wonderful roadmap, Ruth, to do some of these practical things that that I was bringing up. How do we balance between the individual selfish behavior of human nature and, in this case, the community of the congregation? How do we balance those? And for us, it's through the promises we make to one another, the covenant.
And does that sort of filter upwards in our other activities, our other associations and relationships?
Yeah, I mean, certainly in the field of restorative justice, that there could be arguments there that the agreements that are used, because I lifted up a tribe in South Africa, but we have many people here in the United States who often opt opt out of the punitive justice system and invoke a more restorative justice model. That is allowed. It's just it's not very prominent right now. But certainly in the restorative justice models that we use here in the States, even there's this agreement that we have between the person who perpetrates the crime or the offense, the person who was initially offended, and most importantly in restorative models, the entire community as a whole. So yes, this kind of agreement-y thing, they wouldn't call it a covenant necessarily, but sure, I believe that it's a good model that we could use in a larger sense. And even our laws, if our laws weren't so entrenched in divisive language that is non-inclusive of, for example, of queer folk, people of color, at sometimes women, if our laws were much broader so that it was a promise we could actually give to one another, perhaps our even legal and justice system might be a little more adept at handling these differences as well.
Rodney, can you give a little bit more of an example of what your covenant says? Is it? I just like to know kind of how it reads.
Sure. So we basically lift up the fact that we will speak and communicate directly with one another. So that takes care of the rumor mills and other detrimental things to community. It doesn't mean that people don't participate in that, but it does mean that hopefully we don't act on those things. That instead we act only on direct evidence presented to us, direct words, direct thoughts, and actions. So that's one example. Some of the others has to do with online behavior online. I mean, I can send you the bullet list of the actual covenantal language. If you just give me 1 second, I'll get it for you.
Okay, thank you. I think it would be very interesting to see that covenant that all agree to who joined the UU. While you're doing that, let me call on, well, Ruth, you had your hand up, and then Sunshine.
Thank you, Reverend. I would like you to read the quote from the 12-step author again on his definition of evil, because I think that right there sums where our thoughts as a committee was going about the word selfish. I think that clearly unites that without using the word, selfishness is an evil in itself, to be more concerned with the good of self versus the good of the whole. Could you read it again?
Sure. It's from Reinhold Niebuhr. Evil is always the assertion of some interest without regard to the whole, whether the whole be conceived as the immediate community or the total community of humanity or the total order of the world. The good is, on the other hand, always the harmony of the whole on various levels.
Thank you. I thought the evil part was really our thoughts, or certainly it was mine, of selfishness. And it is in so many religions that would that, or paths. And does it go with the Unitarian Universalist that in looking to get beyond ego, which is used in many of the Eastern thought, that is again what we're dealing with, not to be totally concentrating on the physical needs of self and going for the greater good.
Yes. So it probably shouldn't, I didn't cover this, but the American Unitarians had a period of time where they were greatly influenced. In fact, many of them wrote transcendental works. So Thoreau, others, very famously were Unitarians and transcendentalists. And transcendentalism having influence of Hinduism, also then having influences of Buddhism, those types of things overlap. And it's not uncommon to find a number of Buddhist practitioners within the Unitarian Universalist faith. Because we are non-dogmatic, non-creedal faith, we have this odd thing that other churches may or may not have. I don't know. But many times people will hold multiple identities of faith within our communities. So we have plenty of Jewish Unitarian Universalists, plenty of Buddhist, plenty of Hindu, plenty of Islamic Unitarian Universalists, and then of course the mess of all of us who came from some kind of Protestantism into that thing.
Ruth, go ahead, please. You're muted.
I can't turn that hand off and I don't know what I'm doing wrong, so just ignore it.
Oh, well, down at reactions, I think there's a place where you can take your hand off. Okay. All right. So does anybody else have any questions or comments on?
Chris Evans is unmuted. Do they have a question?
Oh, okay. Thank you.
No, that was a mistake.
Okay. Go ahead, Karen, please.
Hi there, my name's Karen Bosque, and I learned a lot today, but I do have one quick question for you. When you were talking about the prognosis or the way the pathway went from people possessing things, and you mentioned enslavement, I had done some research on enslavement, and it was not a brand new idea in America. It was way back in BC 2000. Can't remember the guy's name, but I have all of the notes on it. But they didn't take it as their possessions. These people were owned for a time until they paid off their debts to somebody. And then it moved on to the Hebrew children who were enslaved. And then, of course, in Africa, the Africans themselves enslaved various tribes. So it wasn't always a white guy doing it. And that brings us back to the inherent evil or good in man. Because if this has gone since 2000 BC, that people think slavery is an option, it seems to me that's an idea that's inherent in people that has shown up in various cultures. It's not, and I could go on, but those are the three in the pathway that I have seen. And I wonder how you felt about that.
Yeah, so I think as Americans, we have to be very careful and honest about our history. So the fact that this construct of, first of all, being able to get out of your enslavement through work over time, that really is indentured servitude. That is not chattel slavery. Here in the United States, enslavement took on a completely different, unseen previous characteristic, and that is the chattel piece of chattel slavery, meaning that not only were you enslaved, but you and all of your descendants were enslaved in perpetuity. So, and as far as not seeing or framing things as possessions, I push back on that a little because our own Constitution at some point saw these individuals as only 3/5 human. So it would be very hard for me to honor an argument that said that we did not see them as less than or objects to have, that in fact then we wrote into our basic understanding of law that they were inherently 3/5 human. So I just kind of want to lift up the fact that when you talk about enslavement from a global perspective, the chattel slavery of America is in fact unique and different and not something that was recognized in previous times. That aspect of me being born into as a child slavery and thus being the property of the enslaver for in perpetuity, then all of those descendants, etc., etc. That type of chattel slavery was very unique to the Americas.
Forgive me, wasn't that the Hebrew children though? They kept on having children and they were slaves, and they kept on having children and they were slaves. So it wasn't unique to America that I found in my research, you know.
Sure. I
and
can provide you some
sure, I'd love
textbooks
to
that,
exchange.
yeah, that you could better kind of frame that. But your argument is not new. It's one that I've heard many times before. But in my perspective and with my background, I don't see it that way. Chattel slavery was indeed unique to the Americas.
You don't see it as that innate selfishness versus good.
I
Or you
surely
do?
hope not. They are horrible
Okay.
institutions. So
Oh,
I would,
awful. Oh,
I would
gosh.
hope not.
Yeah, I hate it. I hated the whole thing. It was like repulsive to me. But I just, you know, when you said that, I was like, no, wait, no, wait, no, wait. What I read, it wasn't that unique. And that's why, you know, still happens, you know, really, unfortunately. Thank you.
Thank you. Sunshine, go ahead.
Channing is with me today, Reverend Channing Miller, and I'm going to pass my phone to her because she can't get on. So here we are.
Oh, good. Good to see you, Channing.
Hi, this is Channing at Sunshine's house. We had a power outage this morning, and when the big questions came on, I couldn't get on. So anyway, thank you so much, Rodney. I really appreciated your method of talking about the Unitarian history briefly to help us understand your theological points of view. And I really appreciate, you know, how you're looking at the program from that theological point of view. However, as I understand it, the majority of people in the United States are leaving the church. There's a huge exodus of people who are leaving the church and who are out there on their own, searching for their own spirituality. And I'm just wondering how we can address this population. You know, if we're talking in the beginning of you were talking about the people in the Unitarian Church and the covenant within the church, but what is the perspective of how the Unitarian Church is hopefully going to help the entire United States population? So I'm just wondering if there's anything that can go beyond the Unitarian view for the Unitarians and have a view for the rest of the world. Like Reverend William Barber, for instance, he's a Baptist minister, but he is using his theology to promote justice and peace in the world. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, totally. So basically, how is Unitarian Universalism going to solve every problem in the world, right?
Well, I know that.
I'm just kidding.
We're just starting, you know, we're just trying to get this
Right.
consciousness going.
You know, I think again for me, it is the emphasis that we have on the care we would like to have for one another in terms of how we promise to treat one another, right? So I think this goes a long way. I mean, so for example, if this were just a social club, our social club could easily come up with rules of behavior. This is how we are going to behave. These are things we promise for one another. And it's up to that group to decide how broad they want to do that welcoming. How broad do they want to create a space that is inclusive or not inclusive? But the fact that you would consciously have to think about it, I think, uplifts us from this individual focus to a broader communal focus. Maybe I don't know much about trans lives. And when I'm in a group and the group says, well, we want to start using pronouns just in case there are trans people among us, we want them to feel included and welcomed. And while we're not going to ask people whether they're cis or transgendered, we are going to do this tiny little thing that is an indicator to the trans community that we would at least be welcoming. So that's an example of where an individualized construct might be broadened to a larger group. And that really doesn't have anything to do with Unitarian or Universalist theology, but rather kind of tries to mirror our practice of covenantal behavior so that the group creates the covenant and then upholds one another to that agreed covenant.
Okay, thank you.
Since I'm still on, could I ask, what are your, dealing with the problem, and I believe you have a background in epidemiology, and the problem of COVID, it seems, has splintered that selfless and selfish, because if you believe in the good of the whole, you get vaccinated. You don't argue about whether the vaccine is right or wrong or in the middle. So how do you get a covenant in the United States that would give us some peace or harmony in this situation?
Yeah, so that's really hard because I don't think that it's obviously that it isn't obviously that easy, right? I mean, we're in the state we're in because of and I want to be clear, we're in it because, in my mind's eye, the politicization of it, not because some people cannot get vaccinated for valid medical reasons, not because some people actually have what I would consider a moral proclivity to not getting vaccinated. Those types of things are the reason, from an epidemiologic standpoint, that all the rest of us need to get vaccinated. It's herd immunity. We need to allow for space in our communities for certain people to never receive the vaccine, or because of whatever reasons. But this is different. We have politicized this masking and vaccination status, and our vaccine status is dismal in the United States for COVID-19. This is not true for other vaccines. Other vaccines are on the decline, but they are not abysmal like they are with the COVID-19 vaccine. So yes, it would be hard for us to make a covenant that was wide enough that all of those understandings were present, though I would point to public schools, which have been doing that for decades. People have always been allowed to have a religious exemption for the vaccines of their children or the vaccination status of their children. So it's not like we don't have examples of how we might be better at this type of treatment of one another. But that's just kind of my take. And a lot of our, so for example, I'll focus on the justice system. Because of the justice system and its origins, until there's an atonement for what we've done as a country and for the origins and the remnants of that system, I'm not sure that a full covenant could be something that we would ask people to partake in. So, we did not talk about atonement, but atonement is part of restorative justice as well. And that's something that, I feel like we will eventually need to do as a country, not just for that particular issue within our justice system, but maybe even potentially for this politicization of a basic disease that we have the ability to control.
Thank you. In your work, Rodney, with the Reverend Rodney, with the prison ministry that you do, have you come to any thoughts about the people that are in prison, having to, do they have a natural goodness in them that got abrogated, that got ruined by, culture or family or whatever? Just talk about that a little bit, and then it'll be time to go on to hear our next speaker.
So I now, not before, but now, I'm very careful about seeing it like that. I've seen so many people and heard so many people's stories set with them in what might be one of their deepest, darkest hours. And when you sit with people at those moments in their lives, I would hope that any person who professed love as a central identity would be able to empathize and see themselves in that person's story. And because of that, I cannot look at anyone, regardless of what they've done, and say to that person, that's it. That is the definition of you, and you are nothing more than that. I don't believe any of us, just like Brian Stevenson says, we are not the worst thing that we have done. That is just a behavior that occurs many times for many different reasons. And maybe some of those reasons are good reasons or judged good reasons, and some are not. But for me, the reasons are irrelevant. I do not believe that anyone is the worst thing that they've ever done. And that's really hard. I understand that's a hard concept. As I'll just be honest with you, as a queer person who always growing up had the dangling carrot of doom of pedophilia held over my head, as though that was just the proclivity that was going to happen for me, and that it was inevitable that I would be involved in that level of scandal. Ministering to those who have been charged with sex crimes of other natures and child trafficking and pedophilia was always the most hard thing for me to do. But not because of my theology, because of my own ego, because I was not able to disentangle their life and lived behaviors with my own background and the words that were used to dampen my spirit. But once I was able to overcome that through prayer and therapy, it does not bother me now to be with people who've made really horrendous choices in their life, because everyone has a story. I guarantee you, everyone has a story. And those stories, there but for the grace of God, is all I can say. Because so many times have I met with these people and seen myself in their story. It's just my life and lived experience, for whatever reason, did not pull me into the direction that they have been pulled in, whether it's theft of underwear. I had one woman that I was meeting with on the regular. She had been in and out of jail since she was 15. The original, at 18, the original crime that she got placed into the Solano system for was theft of underwear from Walmart. And that I feel, minor action set her down the path of the system, which promotes this construct of in and out, in and out, in and out. We call it the revolving door. So, and when I was meeting with her, she was in her 30s. So it's very, very sad to me to think that we other even those who have done heinous things in our world and in our country. I want not to be the one that others. I want to be able to see in a person's story their whole capability, as the other quote that I gave, that the human heart has the ability for both selfless and selfish acts. And if I believe that, then I believe there's hope for atonement, even in the most heinous of situations.
Thank you. Thank you, Reverend Rodney. Very rich presentation. Really appreciated your thoughts, and I really like hearing about the Bambini tribe. That's not quite the right name there, but Benimba tribe. I think that's a great model for a family even. Okay, I would like to go on now to introduce Nazeer. Dr. Nazeer Ahmed holds a PhD from Cornell University and degrees in space sciences from Caltech. He is a former NASA scientist and a chief scientist on the NASA Hubble telescope and a team leader on the Apollo moon landing project. He is an inventor, a historian, and a former legislator. His book, Islam in Global History, has been translated into several languages. He is an ardent Sufi, a devout Muslim, and has translated the Quran into easy-to-read American English. Currently, he is the director of the World Organization for Resource Development and Education in Washington, D.C. He is our neighbor, a grandfather of 3, and he lives in Concord. Welcome, Dr. Ahmed.
Thank you, Sarah. It's always a pleasure and a privilege to be with our distinguished colleagues at Rossmore. I take as my point of departure a meeting I had with the Dalai Lama in November 2007. The occasion was an international interfaith conference in Amritsar, India, chaired by the Dalai Lama. I was invited to speak as a Muslim representative from the United States. In my brief presentation, I emphasized how we need, quote, the other to know ourselves. A Christian needs a Buddhist. A Buddhist needs a Christian. A Muslim needs a Hindu, and a Hindu needs a Muslim. The Dalai Lama liked my presentation so much that on his way back to his chamber, he grabbed my hand saying, "Come with me, I want to talk to you." There we were in his chamber, the Dalai Lama, his personal assistant, and a man who had managed to sneak in with us. The Dalai Lama sat to my right, held my right hand, and for a whole hour was rubbing the palm of my hand as he elaborated on how important our differences were in our search for the truth. Now, let's address the question that is posed in this seminar. Are we good or are we bad? Bad is my word. Are we altruistic or are we selfish? The summary of my presentation is this: the human, in his existential essence, is neither good nor is he selfish. He becomes what he chooses. He becomes what he wills and what he does. Look at a newborn baby in his pristine innocence. Is he altruistic or is he selfish? Is he good or is he bad? Empirical observations confirm that he is neither good nor bad, but has the potential to be good or bad. A newborn may grow up to be a saint or a scoundrel. Yes, one becomes a Mother Teresa, another becomes a Hitler. Which one is the archetype of a human? Is it the saint or the scoundrel? Mother Teresa or Hitler? The question is profound. It challenges the sociologist, the historian, the scientist, the man of religion alike. The follow-on question is even more profound. Why? Why is there both good and evil on earth? In this brief presentation, I hope to provide some insights into these questions from my Islamic tradition and also from a spiritual perspective of Sufism and science. At the outset, it's appropriate to clarify our terminology. What does the term human mean? What makes us human? Is it the absence of tail on our backs? The fact that we walk on 2 feet or have a thumb on our hands? The human is a unique creation. His appearance on earth is animated by the spirit that gives him life, knowledge, and power. It is endowed with a heart which is aware of divine grace, a mind that penetrates the very depths of galaxies, eyes that witness the majesty of creation, a tongue that speaks the words of God, intelligence that integrates the magnificent tree of knowledge, hands that create, and feet that walk. In my tradition, the word for the heart is qalb. At its most elemental level, it literally means that which turns like a gimbal in an aircraft or a spacecraft. It can turn towards the divine light that illuminates the innermost heart. On the other hand, it can also turn towards the distractions of the world. The same hands that destroy entire cities in a war can also build a Taj Mahal as a monument to love. The self is a composite term. It is much more than the Freudian ego. It consists of the heart, the mind, the senses. In my tradition, the word for the self is the nafs. The nafs is the self. It is who we are. When it is purified, the self rises up to the heavens and dares to speak to God, as did Moses on Mount Sinai. On the other hand, when it falls into an abyss through wrong choices, it is worse than the beast, the examples of which in history are too numerous to enumerate. The Quran, that is our book, confirms the human condition. It asserts that God created the human, and I quote, with both hands, whereas he created all of the creation, and I quote, with one hand, meaning that the human and the human alone has a predisposition towards both good and evil. The human and the human alone confronts good and evil and makes a choice between the two. It was Descartes who said, I will, therefore I am, to which I add, I do, therefore I am. The Quran expresses it beautifully, and I quote, behold, we created the human in the most noble of molds. Then do we abase him to be the lowest of the low. The Quran confirms the unique honor that God has bestowed upon the human to know, serve, and worship him. It states, and I quote, I offered the trust to the heavens, the earth, and the mountains. They declined, being afraid thereof. The human accepted it. He was indeed foolish, exceeding his bounds. The trust is the honor to know him, love him, cherish him, worship him. The next question is why? and how? In the answer to this question lies the key to the question that is on the table today. Is the human good or is he selfish? The why of our question takes us to the very purpose of creation. In my tradition, creation has a purpose, and that purpose is to find and know the truth. God declares, and I quote, "I created not the heavens and the earth except to reveal the truth." God and only God is the truth. In a divine saying articulated by Prophet Muhammad, God declares, and I quote, "I was a hidden treasure. I willed that I be known. Therefore, I created a creation that would know me." He created the human with both hands so that the human would know the truth. In the Quran, one of the words for the truth is al-haq, which also means justice, balance, rights and responsibilities, what we own and what we owe, so that the human would know the truth. At the confluence, and this is important, at the confluence of the creation of the cosmos in truth and the divine declaration, "I willed that I be known," lies the origin of time. Now we ask the question one more time. Is the human good or is he selfish? He is neither. He chooses between the two. And in this choice is his primordial disposition to search for the truth, namely to search for God, to know him, serve him, love him, and worship him. The same logic can be extended to right and wrong, light and darkness, contentment and greed, righteousness and wickedness. The human is incapable of knowing the absolute essence of a thing. I repeat, the human is incapable of knowing the absolute essence of a thing. There are signs of divine presence in nature and within ourselves. What makes them manifest are contrast and change. As the Quran expresses it, and I quote, "I will show them our signs on the horizon and within their own selves until it is manifest to them that it is the truth." On the horizon means nature and history. Within our own selves means our own inner selves. Only a being that can perceive both good and evil can know what good is. What is bad plays the role of making manifest what is good. Darkness plays the role of making light manifest. It may be a hard concept to grasp and one that is profoundly troubling to religious people. The devil plays an important role in making manifest God's grace. Good and evil are both necessary parts of human existence. Would forgiveness make sense if there was no sinner? Would Jesus heal if there was no leper? Now on to the even more profound question. What is good and what is evil? What is selfish and what is unselfish? Who sets the criterion for good and bad or good and evil? Are the two separate and distinct from each other? Or are there shades in between? Ponder over the rotation of the earth around its own axis. At what point does nightfall end and daylight begin as the two are coiled onto the one into the other, and the one rolls into the other with the rotation of the earth? In the Abrahamic traditions, and Islam is one, that criterion comes from God. That revelation becomes the foundation for guidance to the ethical questions facing man. All the do's and the don'ts, the laws, the rules, regulations, the host of legalities, legislative edicts follow. For the question in hand, namely, are we good or are we selfish? What is the guidance from the Islamic tradition? What is good in the Islamic tradition is what God loves, and what is not good is what God does not love. Here are a few guidelines from the Quran. God is love. God is gracious, forgiving, merciful. He loves those who are gracious, forgiving, merciful. He loves those who serve him and his creation, those who adore him and his creation, those who are righteous, those who are grateful, thankful, who ask for forgiveness, those who are just, those who do beautiful deeds, those who purify themselves, their own souls. On the other hand, God does not love the ungrateful, the unjust, the arrogant, those who deny and cover up the truth, those who are extreme, those who are hypocrites. We can see the common ethical thread between the major religions of man: righteous and noble works, service, worship, forgiveness, gratitude, repentance, justice are praiseworthy. Wickedness, ingratitude, injustice, arrogance are blameworthy. Very few humans neatly fall into one of these two categories. They are somewhere in between. Most of us at once love and hate, give and hold back, are humble and arrogant, serve and are selfish. It is our destiny to struggle through shades of light and darkness, to discern, recognize, and find God. This struggle takes on greater importance for the modern man, surrounded as he is with the cacophony of urban life. Here, there are lessons to learn for us from space sciences. When we design a space telescope to acquire a target in the farthest corners of the universe, we speak of the signal to noise ratio, abbreviated as SNR. The signal is the light or the electromagnetic emissions from the target. For instance, a distant galaxy in the universe that is 10 billion years old gives off faint signals. The noise is the light and radiation from city lights or other celestial bodies. To learn something about a target galaxy, we want to magnify the signal and reduce or eliminate the noise from all other sources. When we build large telescopes, we spend an enormous amount of effort and money to keep out the stray light. That is why large telescopes are located on mountaintops. On the Hubble Space Telescope, we spent almost $40 million designing the light shield and the knife edges to minimize stray radiation. The human is like a heavenly sensor. The signal is the light from the presence of God. It shines in the innermost recesses of the heart. Every human is a unique temple of God. Every human is a unique temple of God. It does not matter what your faith is, what your color is, or nationality is, or whatever you believe in. The stray light is the distractions of life or the evil whispers of the devil. The more urban the environment, the greater is the noise that seeks to subsume and cover up the divine signal. You can see this in the great pilgrimage centers of the earth: Rome, Jerusalem, Mecca, Kashi, and so on. Modern man has the challenge not to lose sight of the divine light that beats in his heart. In Islam, the mechanisms to keep out the stray light take the form of prayer, charity, forgiveness, honesty, integrity, beautiful and noble works, and most important, a constant awareness of the presence of God, a constant awareness of divine presence. We need to maximize the SNR within each of us. Each of us is at once a star and a sensor, unique in existence. That is the transcendent beauty of being human. To summarize, the human is neither good nor is he selfish. He is just human. He is both good and bad, altruistic and selfish. That is his nature. He was so designed by divine purpose to fulfill his divine mission on earth. And that divine mission is to search through good and evil and various shades in between and to know God. That is our existential divine mission. And that's what makes us human. I will conclude where I started, my meeting with the Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama understood that the only way you know your own self is through the other. If there is not the other, there is no you. In the same way, the human learns what is good by sifting through shades of light and darkness. The struggle is continuous and unceasing until death claims us and the spirit returns to its creator. Are we good or are we selfish? Neither. We become what we choose. We become what we will. We become what we do. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmed. You made an important point about free will choice. And that is where it's at, is free will choice. We choose really throughout the day, we choose which way, which light or not we go or turn towards. Let's see, somebody had their hand up a minute ago. Was that Colleen? No. Oh, Karen.
No, I had a clapping hand up.
Oh, clapping.
Very good.
Okay.
Both the speakers were very good. Thank you.
Okay, Karen, please go ahead. Oh no, Karen's got a thumb up. Okay. It's interesting to hear from a scientist who is also a religionist, or a religionist who is also a scientist. What percentage, I wonder, Nazeer, of scientists are religious? Do you have any idea?
That's a good question. You know, it depends on what we mean by religious.
Well, more light, you know, turning towards the light, believing in a divinity, believing there's more than just the material world.
Yeah, I'll give you a convoluted, complex answer, not a simple. It's God's grace that we are rational human beings. The mind is one of the most marvelous creations that one could conceive of. Is perhaps next to the heart, the most magnificent of God's creations, in as much as it enables us to know God's creation. It enables to know our environment, enables to know ourselves and the future, enables us even to reach for the very depths of galaxy. So in that sense, all scientists are religious. But if we mean by religious, the narrow definition that we have, well, God is this, God is that, etc. A scientist by definition searches for the truth. And the name for God is the truth. God is the truth. God is justice. A scientist searches for the justice, that balance. What is the attraction? What's the repulsion? What holds a star in place? What makes the earth go around its axis? What makes the sun move in the galaxy? So in that sense, a scientist is a religious being. But to answer it in the way most people understand it. Most of the scientists that I met, most of the people who are pursuing science at Caltech, at Cornell, at NYU, other places, were deeply religious people. And this may surprise most people. They think that somehow religion takes you away from faith. No, religion takes you towards faith, not away from it.
Thank you. I would think that that would be true. The more you examine the universe, whether you're looking at the macrocosm or the microcosm, it would become clear that there is energy beyond what we can see.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
that energy pulls us towards it.
Absolutely. Well, there's much more to it, but let me see if there are any other comments.
I know that there's a lot of thoughts going on in those minds out there and hearts.
So allow me to then continue talking for half an
Please.
hour so that people can formulate their questions. You know, for instance, we talk about the origin of the universe. And we talk about the Big Bang. How did the Big Bang come about? And we observed the fact that the galaxies were expanding, the universe was expanding. We built a model, and then based upon the projections of that model, we said what happens as you push the model towards the beginning of it. You find a singularity, meaning that things go back to a dot, a singularity. And the singularity we call the Big Bang. And we made assumptions about it. We said, what happens at the moment of the Big Bang when this enormous amount of energy all of a sudden makes itself manifest? The first few micro milliseconds that are very small amount of time, we don't know what happened. We don't know what kind of gravity there was, what kind of electromagnetic radiation, whether there was only one kind of a wave or multiple. So we make assumptions, but then the scientist knows how magnificent a creation it is. In other words, positivistic knowledge cannot give us fundamental answers that we see. Who are we? Why are we here? What are we here for? Positivistic knowledge cannot give us those answers because it does not ask those questions. And therefore, I find that most people of science, men and women of science that I came across, are conscious of it. They're humble. The more they know, the more humble they are. Of course, there are some arrogant ones too, but by and large, they're humble people.
And humble people ask questions because they do not know all that there is to know.
That's the way, that's where we begin. Science begins with the premise, I don't know. A true scientist, if you talk to him, he will start with the statement, I do not know, but here's what little I know. So let me present it to you and let's engage in a discussion and together search for the truth. And science is nothing but the search for the truth in a certain way, with certain assumptions.
Well, that puts to rest a question of scientists and their beliefs in spirituality. For me, anyway, I'm glad to hear that so many scientists are humble and ask questions and probably find answers. Paul, please go ahead.
I think back to my roots, of course, with Paramahansa Yogananda and some of the teachings there. It comes to me as it's basically yin and yang. It's basically Maya. It's basically pluses and minuses. I mean, it's like computers are based upon zeros and ones. And so our whole world is basically a ball going back and forth. And, this whole idea of good and bad or evil or whatever is, again, just a manifestation of what the essence is of our whole creation. And it's just, I think of a computer program. It all starts off with zeros and ones, but it becomes very complex. And that's why a program works. And we're the same way. We start off with a very yin and yang, and it just builds upon itself. And then we end up with where we are today. And as Doctor said here, it's all about free will. It's the choices of the matter. It's not definitive. It says you are a bad person, period. And that's it, branded, done, out of the way. At a certain point in time, you make a decision based upon what you have. You think it's the right thing to do, you do it. 10 seconds later, you go, maybe that wasn't a good decision. Are you a bad person? No. You're a person that's realized you have new information and you make a new choice. And so that's the challenge in this material world is fathoming all of this stuff and trying to make some sense of it. And because we humans are very limited in our perspective. It's like the electromagnetic energy fields are huge. If you look at what instruments can measure, it's way beyond what our senses can measure. And so just because we can't see or hear it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And so that's the challenge, what we're dealing with.
That's an excellent comment. The issue is even more profound than just good and evil or yin and yang. The issue is one of change. What moves the world is change. You know, we got off on the wrong trajectory, we human beings. As human beings, we got off on the wrong trajectory by asking ourselves what time is, or worse, by assuming that time is real and what time has to manifest is real. When we ponder over it a little bit, time itself does not make sense. The only thing that makes sense is change. And change makes sense because change makes possible perception. If there was no change, if there was no contrast, if there was no variegated shades of darkness and light, we as humans would not know anything because a thing in itself is not knowable with what God has given us. Therefore, time becomes change, and change is a gift from God, if you would. The galaxies rotate, the universes rotate, the earth rotates, everything rotates. Time goes by. We are born, we grow young, and then we grow old by the grace of God. If that were not so, if we're always young, always children, or always whatever, then we would not know anything. So it ultimately goes back to our purpose, divine purpose, to believe why are we here, except to know the truth, to know Him. And were it not for change, were it not also for our abilities, inner abilities to perceive change, measure change in different ways, the scientific way, the historian's way, the religious way, each one does it in his own way, we would not know Him. And ultimately, that's to know Him, to love Him. And that means to love everyone. Love is the arrow.
Thank you. Thank you. Beautiful. Sunshine.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nazeer. You give me great joy in your words. What's very joyous to me is from a little girl as a Catholic in catechism to what is God and why are we here, to know, love, and serve God in this world and forever after, is what you learn in the Baltimore Catechism. And I too am a follower of Yogananda, and to know God is also the path of self-realization, to realize that God is within us. So, but yet I wanted to ask you two things that you said. One, you said as in the Quran, what God likes or loves really was more or less the good, and wasn't loving the unforgiving, the ungenerous, ungrateful soul. So did you really mean that? Or because aren't we taught God loves all of us, and that, but I don't know, I'm not actually clear on that, on where does God's love go when you're bad? I mean, God loves us all the time. And the other question was, could you explain more the positivistic knowledge? I don't know that term. And you said that positivistic knowledge cannot answer the big questions of who we are, what is everything. Thank you.
Two very good questions. Positivistic knowledge is rational knowledge. So for instance, we ask ourselves, what is love? Would reason teach us what love is? All we have to do is to watch two young people fall in love. I mean, it's the most beautiful thing in the world. People do all kinds of things. Oh, this, whatever happens. Why do people fall in love? Why do we love a flower? Why do we love Yosemite? Why do we love the stars? And that moment of being in love with God's creation, and sometimes being in love with what is inside of us, I'm not talking about our face or whatever. The moment of, is there a rational explanation for it? No. Why does a human being want to climb Mount Everest? Why? Why does a child want to climb a wall? Why should boy? Why does he do it? There is no rational reason for it. So reason takes us to the threshold of the truth, but it does not unlock it. There is something more to the truth than what reason gives us. Mathematics cannot unlock the reason for love. Mathematics cannot unlock the reason for us being human. So that's the limit of positivistic knowledge is great in as much as it takes us to the very outer limits of God's creation. But it does not unlock that truth. That truth, it takes a leap of faith, something more beyond positivist knowledge to go from that knowledge onto heaven. That's one thing. Then the question of God is always good. Why is there evil? I'm paraphrasing your question. Why is it something that in the Quran said God does not love those who are ungrateful? God does not love those who are extreme. God does not love those who are unjust. Now, let's take the example of justice. God does not love it because God wants us to be, God created us. This is an explanation, by the way. My way of explaining it, this is not what the Quran is. My way of understanding is that God created us for a purpose, with a purpose. The purpose to know him, serve him, and worship him. When we are just, we are in consonance with the wavelengths from God. The wavelength from God is justice. What is justice? I'm fair to you, that is justice. If I cause you harm, that is injustice. That's going to take us away from our mandate. It's going to cause trouble in our ability to fulfill the destiny that we have. In the extreme case, I didn't want to mention it, but I'll mention it. When a person takes another person's life unjustly, that is injustice. God does not love that. God does not want you to take somebody else's life. He wants us to cherish that life, to sustain that life, to feed that person, and not to kill that person unjustly. So when we say God loves and does not love, it is a way of guiding the human towards his destiny, so that the human knows what is good and what is not good. Otherwise, we would not have a choice. That's my understanding of it. It may not be the best explanation, but that's all that a student of science can offer. I'm sure the Reverend here would have a better answer.
Thank you, Dr. Nazeer. And that was, I think, about attunement. That when you spoke, it gave me a real clarity of thinking that I know in the path of Yogananda, we are taught very much to look to attune ourselves, not only to the teacher who is the channel to God, but also to God himself. And that attunement would be the wiring that I felt. You probably get static when you're out of tune. Thank you.
Go ahead, Karen. We're almost out of time, so
it's a quick question. It's a quick question.
Okay.
I'm aware that there are different interpretations of the word love. Now, when you say God does not love in the Hindi, I believe, religion, that God does not love injustice, ungratefulness, etc. is that, can you equate that with agape love or filial love or storge love or eros love? Agape is the God love, the way we feel towards God. This is a quickie for, yeah, this is just a quick definition. I'm sorry if you're not familiar, but I thought maybe because you were linguistic and you had interpreted the Quran, maybe you knew if there were different words for love in the Quran, like what is that word love? Are there more than one definition of love in the Quran? That was my question. How's that for better?
The one definition of love, the true definition of love, is unqualified, unfettered, undemanding, complete unity with God, with what is good. Once there is a qualification, then it becomes other kinds of love. Unqualified, unfettered, undemanding, total, complete. Here I am, O Lord, I'm yours. For instance, I'll give you an example from our tradition. Very often, when I go for prayer and I see so many people, they raise their hands and they pray and they ask for this. God, give me a house. God, give me a job. God, give me a beautiful wife, etc., etc. I say to them, suppose you do meet God. What would you ask him? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. If you met the king of the king of the king of the king of the world, what would you ask him? Nothing. Give me what you want to give me. In other words, that is love. Love is total surrender. Total. Whatever he is, I'm with you. I'm nothing but you. That's when a human becomes a reflection of God's light. He himself emanates the divine light in his being, and he becomes like Moses on Mount Sinai, or like Jesus, or etc. That is pure light.
Thank you. Reverend Rodney, do you have a comment? I believe that Dr. Ahmed offered you a chance to say something, and I just wanted to give you a chance before we say goodbye.
No, just to say I really enjoyed hearing the perspective and finding the commonality with some of the Unitarian Universalist beliefs as well.
Yes. Yes.
It was very interesting that coming from different faith perspectives, we share a very closely held understanding of human nature.
Yes. And we find, as we've been doing the big questions over the many years, that the golden threads go through all of the religions. I would like to close with one of my favorite quotes from Michael Singer, and maybe many of you have heard of him. He's really quite a prolific. He's really a philosopher and a psychiatrist. Here's the quote: "The spiritual journey is one of constant transformation. We must give up the struggle to remain the same and embrace change at all times." So we appreciate all of you showing up and joining us and your comments, and especially thank you, Dr. Ahmed and Reverend Rodney, for your preparations. And I will send your talks to at least the people who have joined us, maybe to the whole list. And we look forward to seeing you. The next big question will be on April 17th. It's always on the third Monday of each month. And we will have Pascal Kaplan from Sufism Reoriented and Chitra Mane representing Hinduism. So we look forward to you joining at if you're available at that time. So go with goodness, go with God, go with love. Thank you so much to our speakers and for all of your energy and the Big Questions Committee. Until next time.
Thank you.